So today I'm here to talk about Vapor, not Viper. Yeah, so there's quite a few web frameworks that came out since Swift was open sourced, and I chose kind of half randomly to have a look at Vapor, and the community seems to be pretty good. They are iterating really fast. They're already on 3.0. The first release candidate was announced, I think, 2 months ago, and they're already almost reaching stable on most of their repos. So it's really moving fast, and it's interesting. So I'm going to be talking about how you can write Swift to make an API or a website, and if you do so, you may want to share some of your code with an app to avoid duplication, and that would be really nice if we could do that. So it's not a talk about like in-depth intro to Vapor, because I only started discovering Vapor like a couple of weeks ago. It's not about HTML and TSS. If you know HTML and TSS and see my code, you're just going to cry. And I'm not advocating a single setup. I just came up with like a stupid sample project just to showcase a few ideas. And I'll try to highlight when there's other ways you could do the same thing. But it's mostly a way to see how in the future we could like maybe write your own mock server, or even your production API, or any kind of web service that you would need that you could write in Swift. So let's have a look at this. So if you want to know more about Vapor, you should check those URLs. And I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, any tutorial that you wanted to look at to learn iOS was like a Twitter client. And everything was just, it was like the hello world of iOS. And since I'm also doing server side now, I thought, why not reinvent completely Twitter, like in a 20 minutes version of Twitter. So I can't really use the same word, but I stayed in the theme of birds and bird sounds. So I'm going to show you tonight chirper. It's kind of awkward to say chirps for tweets and chirper for Twitter. And I kind of dug my own grave on that one, but let's go ahead and start and see how that works with the mic and all that stuff. Can you still hear me or not? I can just shout as well, so it's also an option. All right, so if you download the Vapor command line toolbox, it helps you to create a templated project and generates the Xcode project for you. And you would start with something that looks very similar to this. I've changed a few bits, and we're going to keep working on it together to okay. No, you don't see anything. Oh, that's interesting. Isn't it mirroring? All right. That's a demo effect, we call it.
You angered the demo gods.
There we go.
All right, so you would see something that you download the command line tools from Vapor, and you create a new project, and you would pretty much see that instead of chirps, you would see to do, and that's their template. And if you're not familiar with the way web projects work, the main entry points to your project will be the routes. So that's where the requests arrive, and you decide how to handle those requests. And so far, we handle just one type of paths and 3 HTTP verbs. So we can do a get on chirps and a post on chirps to create a chirp, or we can delete chirps.
I'm sold already.
Can you edit?
You cannot edit chirps yet. So if we run that project, that's pretty much what you get. Like, you don't have to write any code, and you get something very similar to that from the Vapor toolbox. And you build and run that, and it's going to take, oh yeah, I must have cleaned just before the start. That's a good idea, so you can enjoy the length of the first build. So you won't see much that's really interesting in the browser, but we're still going to have a look. So somewhere here, come on, it's about time to build. All right, it's going to run on localhost 8080, and you can start hitting that that host.
So what is it? It's built as a macro stack, or?
What do you mean?
Like
Paper generates some project. What is the project? Is it a macOS native app? Or?
Yeah, it runs on Linux, on macOS, and by default, the project says that it can run on any other kind of platform like tvOS and stuff, but I don't know why. It's mostly for macOS and Linux. So let's have a look at localhost 8080. If you hit /chirps, we haven't added any in the database, so all we have is a JSON empty array. So it's probably more interesting to look at it through paw, and let's see. You can see that if you hit this from localhost 8080 with a get verb and chirps, you have an empty array. So let's create a chirp that says, hello, CocoaHeads. I am zooming in on my computer, but there's a bit of lag. It's great. How can I maybe change the resolution of the screen?
No, don't.
All right.
We'll believe you.
There'll be video evidence on YouTube later. Yeah.
So here I just in the browser again. That's the first chirp. It's a JSON spit out. So now let's go back to the project and try and add an HTML page so that we can actually see something that's in a human readable format. So let's say we're going to add a route at the path, just the empty path, and it will be handled by an index handler. And now we can go and have a look at our controller. That's pretty empty. And the listing for the API, it's just querying the chirps and returning all of them. And there's a feature that's just the way the threading is handled. I don't have time to go into detail with this.
It's the future.
And if we write an index handler, all we do is, instead of returning a raw object, we want to return a view. And what a view is just you ask a template renderer to generate a view, and you pass it some values. So here we are getting all the chirp objects, and we map them to a view. And to do so, we create a template renderer called leaf renderer, and say use the index template and look at the key chirps, and you will have some chirps. And
Big compact map.
and unfortunately, the template engine uses a syntax that Xcode doesn't know yet, but pretty much that's what you get in a template. So it's HTML with a few extra keys that the template renderer can use. So if we rebuild this and run, we now have an extra handler for the empty path, and if we try and hit that URL, we have 0 chirps because in dev environment, the database is only in memory, so it doesn't persist to disk. So let's quickly create a few chirps like this. And now we can reload the page, and now we have a few chirps. It's really ugly because there's no CSS, and there's this giant Etienne guy that keeps spamming the service with some lorem ipsum. So let's change that. And in the configuration, let's enable serving static files, because obviously your Swift code can render a template and can render like a JSON collection of objects or whatever, but you may want to also serve some static files. So there's this concept of middlewares and services and providers that you can all read about on the documentation. The only thing I want to highlight here is the default API template that you get when you create a new project doesn't serve static files, probably for security reasons. And here in the public, have added some CSS and a few images. So if we build and run again, and let's populate the in-memory database again, and if I reload that page, suddenly I have a much better looking website. That's why I'm so unprepared, is because I spent 3 days writing CSS. Just to reach that point. So here the creation date is still just the value of the timestamp, and we're going to work on that a bit. Let's try and hit with Paul the API to delete chirp number 2, the spammy one with the lorem ipsum, and if we reload, it's gone, obviously. All right, so we have 3 endpoints that allows us to list the messages, to create messages, and to delete messages. And we have one web page accessible that renders HTML and CSS. That's for the server side. So we have chirper. I can't zoom in. Yeah, but so that's, you have your modal file here. It's backed by SQLite, and there's no point in going into too much details with that. So let's have a look at an iOS app that would work with that. So we have a view controller. It's a lot crowded when you zoom in. So with a pull to refresh table view that just shows you a list of messages, you're hitting the same endpoint /chirps with a get by default, and you deserialize the JSON that you get. You try to construct chirp objects, and you render that on the screen. So let's try and have a look. Why is it opening another one? I don't know. Oh, it's the plus. Okay. And in the meantime, let's add some more randomly generated messages. So now we have chirper for iOS. Come on, buddy. There you go. There's nothing. We pull to refresh, and we see some messages here showing. And here, you can't really see, but you'll have to take my word for it. The rendering of the creation date has been rendered slightly different, but still, it's not great.
Zooming doesn't work across the
Yeah. All right. I won't try to zoom in. How can I do that? I don't know.
Scale up again.
That's fine.
Doesn't like? Nah. All right. Nah, it doesn't like that.
Don't go to the top.
What was the next step after that? Oh yeah. So at the moment, I've redefined the same object in my iOS client, and I have the same modal object in the server side. What would be great is to have like some sort of shared library using CocoaPods or Carthage or subprojects or whatever solution you want. And the simplest I could come up with to showcase that is to create another Xcode project and put all 3, the Vapor one, the iOS one, and the shared framework, all of them in a workspace. So let's do that now. Yep, let's stop that.
Are you okay with that, Oliver?
Yes. Does he need to be okay with it?
So we have ChirpKit with a protocol for chirp properties. And for now, there's nothing yet. It's just a basic setup where you have 2 frameworks, one for iOS, one for macOS for the server side. And so we're going to have files in those 2 targets, and we're going to put those targets into as embedded libraries into these other projects. So that's for the ChirpKit for now. So let's go in Xcode and go new workspace, and let's call that chirper. And now in chirper, we're going to add chirper web, if I can. And we're going to add chirper iOS. Nope. And finally, ChirpKit. So there's several different ways to do that, to share code between several projects. And I just took this one because it seemed to be the simplest one for that effect. So now we have several schemes, one for the chirper iOS, one for ChirpKit, and one for the running the server. And this one, I don't know why it just showed up. Doesn't matter. So in chirper iOS, let's go and link a framework, and it's going to be ChirpKit for iOS. And in Chirper Web, the Vapor app, in the app, we're going to add Chirper for macOS. Right, you can't really read that. You have to take my word for it, sorry. They are internal dependencies. Like you don't have to use Vapor to use, for example, their template engine or their SQLite database kind of thing. Like all of this is completely modular, and you can use as many as you want. You can use third party or first party or none of them, or you can replace with whatever. It seems really modular. I haven't used that modularity yet. So the next step is to, what was the next step? Yes, we're actually going to make the framework useful by actually putting things in it. So here, what is it? Chirp properties. All right, so we pretty much have the same object in Chirper for iOS. We had a chirp that has an author message and some creation and update date objects, and the modal on the server side is very similar. Now maybe we want to share and even enhance that. So in ChirpKit, we have those properties, chirp properties, and there's an extra one, message length, that none of them implement. And we're going to even provide, why not, a default implementation. So message length is just the count of characters in the message. And let's try and make sure that the app and the server side now use that. So on the iOS side, we're going to import ChirpKit. Maybe we need to build once, so it realized that you can have ChirpKit, and we're going to add chirp properties. And on the server side, we're going to just add an extension saying that we want to what's the word?
Chirp properties.
No, we want to conform to that protocol. That's the word. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Oh, I need to import ChirpKit here. All right, so now that our modals on the iOS and the server side have the extra message length behavior, and it's already implemented by default, let's see how we can use that. So for example, in the chirp controller, instead of just returning an array of chirps, we will return a structure that is encodable that has extra data about the object, because for some reason Vapor doesn't see this extra property that's been added by a protocol extension. So let's say we have a struct called chirp information context, because this thing that you pass here to the template engine is called the rendering context. So it's the variable that you want to give it to. So we make it encodable, and let's say that it will have a chirp, and it will have a message length. And all we need to do now is take this array of chirps that we get here, and let's map it to a chirp, no, not properties, chirp information context. So it will just take the chirp that we had as the first parameter, and here it will take message length. I would be glad if the autocompletion would work and prove that what I'm doing kind of works. And will I have? Maybe I need to change my scheme. No, not this one. All right.
Ooh, Xcode.
And is Xcode gonna like that or not? Last time I forgot to change the platform requirements. I had to like kill the deref data and rebuild from scratch, and it took like 10 minutes.
You
So I
still have similar select as the destination.
say again.
You still have similar select as the destination.
Yep, that's a good one. Is that gonna help?
Do you need to throw in chirp information?
Yeah, so here instead of chirps, we're gonna have chirp informations. And I have a backup project on the side, like this, like to the end state. So if this happens, I can just switch to the other one. I may do that if in 1 minute it's still not building. We'll need to change the template to instead of iterating through an array of chirps, it's going to iterate through an array of chirp informations. And all right, let's have a look. Yes, this template that Xcode doesn't know what kind of syntax it is. So here we are dealing with chirp information, and the chirp is a sub-property of the chirp information. So let's just do this. And we'll just show the message length, which is on chirp information dot message length. And this, if I'm not cursed, should work. And again, let's put some chirps in the database and reload. And now we have the character count. So if you wanted to know that this lorem ipsum here is 838 characters, it's really interesting to see that, for example, this emoji is considered only one character at the moment. But let's go back to this. We have done that on the server side, on the web interface. Now let's try and bring the same feature to the iOS client. So the iOS client, we've declared conformance to chirp properties. So let's go and see in the table view cell and say, instead of receiving a chirp, you're receiving a chirp properties, which you don't know because you need to import. And all right, so now I can populate the message length label and say all right, there's no localization, there's no handling of plurals and all that kind of stuff. Who needs that? And no, I don't need to. I need to have the server running, and I need to build and run the iOS app. And let's put some chirps in the database, and let's see what's happening. Can you see what I'm saying? Yes. And the simulator is reloading. Great, very, very captive audience. No one's saying anything. They're like waiting. Is it going to crash? All right, let's pull to refresh. And now we have. You can't see it actually. That's great because it's too small. Can you see that here? So you have the same character count, and so the point is like it's really underwhelming, but the point is that the implementation of that, which is just a one-liner, is in the framework, and I didn't have to implement that in the iOS client and on the server. It's really underwhelming because really counting characters is not hard. But let's try and see that if in ChirpKit, for example, it was before the string were before the strings were revamped in Swift 3, I think, or 4. It was actually giving you the count of like all the Unicode code points. So for example, for the family emoji, it's actually 11 characters. And that's why I have this sample message here. So yeah, you again can't see it, that's a bit stupid. But and if we rerun the server again, and you get what's going to happen. It's going to work in the same way on the server. And that's the point I was trying to reach, is that with a very underwhelming example, we can share code, but like the modal, we can, because of the way Vapor works and that it needs to implement its own modal, so it's only done through a protocol, so it's not as tight as one could wish, but the implementation of some properties can be shared. And it means that, for example, for business logic that would be a bit more involved, for example, sorting objects, and you want that to be consistent on the way the chirps would be sorted on the web interface and on the iOS client. So you surface like the most important or the most likes or whatever. All of this logic, instead of having to duplicate it between the two clients, the web app and the iOS client, you can have one central point, and because it's all Swift, you can have it in one workspace, in one window in Xcode, and it's just happier. Now we have 11 characters for the family. Yeah, I think there was way more things that I wanted to show to exemplify the same thing, but I guess you get the point. Like, for example, I could have rendered the timestamp with like saying 10 minutes ago and 3 minutes and 24 seconds ago. What's interesting for us iOS developers is that it's Swift code with libraries that we know, Foundation and the date components formatter and stuff like this. So you can write that once in a shared framework, and then you can have the same functionality using types, type safety of Swift and the types that you know, and the power of Foundation on both platforms. And I think that's really exciting, because before I started as an iOS dev, I did a bit of PHP development, web development in PHP, and now that I have this knowledge of Swift and how powerful the Apple platform and the Apple frameworks are, I'm really excited to be able to use that on the web. There's obviously one limitation here. Again, it's like one of those things that I said, like, I went for the easiest setup. It deploys, the server runs on the Mac, so if you're running on Linux, you won't have all of the Apple frameworks. But I guess those problems are going to be less and less as time comes. So yeah, that's about it. That's Vapor 3.0. It's going to reach stable status very soon, and you should all have a look. And that's it.
Couldn't help but notice that Vapor has a lot of dependencies. I was just curious if you thought any of those, so I assume all those dependencies are just pure Swift code.
Say again?
Are all the dependencies pure Swift? Like there's just Swift code that builds up Vapor? Yeah,
Vapor is pure Swift. The leaf template thing it's like a pseudo language within the language, but it's the parser and all of this is written in Swift. The entire thing is in Swift. It's all open source, and it's like, I think there's 40 contributors. The other day on Slack, someone was saying, oh, there's not enough documentation. Where, like, should we always hit the help channel on Slack if we have questions? And people said yes. Most of the knowledge of the new API and the changes is shared across 40 people, but they know that, and they are writing more and more documentation. There's API documentation, but there's also like the starter guide and stuff like this on their website. That's pretty good, but they're going to improve it and improve it.
if I remember correctly, some of this Vapor stuff is based on Swift project stuff as well. Like there's several Swift projects and the Swift level projects. But anyway, my key question was actually more around your thoughts on whether or not some of the projects that are sub-projects of Vapor are actually useful within apps. Like, for example, template. That looks like if you're doing like embedded HTML content within your app or something, or using HTML render.
I see what you mean.
Use the template.
I only started looking at Vapor 2 weeks ago. It seems like if you want to use them like within iOS, maybe it's a bit of an overkill because they come with a lot. They are built. They had to reinvent a few wheels because they can't use some of the Apple frameworks that you don't have on Linux. So I think you could take a few shortcuts and have a more lightweight dependency rather than having the entire, like, I don't know if the parser is rewritten from scratch or whatever, but I assume that some of their dependencies, you could bypass them if you're on an Apple platform because you would probably have like the default Apple things. But supposedly by design, all of their repos can be used separately. And they obviously have like the main core repo that brings it all together and all that kind of stuff, but you could use the SQLite ORM as a standalone, supposedly. I haven't tried, but that's how it's advertised.
Cool.
Matt, you had a question, right?
Yep.
I'm not taking questions from Matt.
To sort of follow on from Oliver's question, do you see the templating which is used in Vapor as being beneficial towards code generation libraries and stuff like that?
You mean using the templating language for code generation? I didn't think of that. I don't know if it's limited to HTML, and at the moment, the problem with their templating engine is that there's only a few keywords, and it's only like you have a for loop, you have if statement, and you can just print the value of a variable. You can extend it and add your own tags. For example, if you want to generate like an HTML image tag with just the name of the asset, for example, and it just does all the boring thing for you, you'd have to write that yourself. You can extend that. I assume that they're going to keep adding to it. But for code generation, like to generate Swift code or another language code that's not HTML and CSS, I don't know if that would be very interesting because I think it's trying to be just for HTML.
Okay, I will.
Sorry, when are we getting the CocoaHeads website written in Swift?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite compelling. As a PHP developer who's been writing a lot of PHP, that looks like the Swift version of some of the more popular web frameworks. If they're talking about the code generation or this kind of view parsing that they're doing, if they're going to become a full-scale web framework, they've got a lot of work to do. Like the full-scale PHP web frameworks or other Java or Python web frameworks have got 10 years in front of the Swift system. But it's super compelling to be able to share your model between the two things. In your experience at the moment, have you looked at where you might deploy that server or something like that? I mean, it's great having it on your local server and a local machine, and it's already took a long time for PHP to be able to do that sort of thing. But
one of the wow effects of this demo, if I had time to do that, is with their command line interface, you can just go Vapor deploy, and it's for free. You have like 20,000 requests or whatever on their website. Like their website is vapor.codes for like the framework website. But if you go to vapor.cloud, they actually, I guess that's kind of like their business model in the long term is that they provide a framework and they can also like do hosting as a service. So you can do that. That's like the cheapest, quickest option is like you want to try something like you're developing and you want actually like being running on probably Linux and not your machine just to test that it works. And I haven't looked at other options for deployment because I didn't have time. But
that's a start.
I think you can also like they have scripts or like already prepared like images, Docker images for Heroku or something like this. But I've never tried that, and I know those words, but I've never tried it. So I don't even know how it works. Like I can say Heroku, but I don't know what it is.
There are Slack builders for Heroku for Swift, and I think Linux, IBM's cloud platform, they're not. I don't think they're behind Vapor, but they've got another web framework that IBM's contributing as well.
Yeah, Kichura. And I think they are sharing a few components with Kichura, but I'm not too sure. But for example, coming back to the templating engine, Leaf is the one that's provided and is the first-party one, but you can also use Mustache, I think. And I think there's even a first-party kind of adapter, so you can just use Mustache and an adapter, so it goes into Vapor very quickly if you're more used to use Mustache as a templating engine, for example.
More questions, guys?
Thank you.
Want to take another one from Matt? Weekend party is spoken.
So, jumping on what Jesse just asked about, why would you choose Vapor over Chirp or Perfect or something else?
It's a very personal choice for me. I went with Vapor because I think when the first few web frameworks came out, before it was called Vapor, it was slightly different, and it was just like a side project of some random person on GitHub, and it looked like, I looked at their code, and it looked pretty good. And Kitura, I don't know, I tried to reading their thing, but it seemed like there was more setup, and I wanted to actually do like a comparison of like, okay, I'm going to try, like I do Hello World in Kitura, Hello World with Vapor, and Hello World with Perfect, because they are pretty much like the three main ones at the moment. Perfect, like you need to use a macOS app to run, and like it seems like they are trying to go the proprietary route. IBM, I don't know, it seems a bit heavier in terms of dependencies and amount of code. It's again like it's purely personal, like just first impression, looking at their GitHub repo, reading a few things. And Vapor seems like a bunch of people started something with fresh ideas and really rapidly came to 3.0. So I find that pretty promising. So that's why I want to give it a crack at this one.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Cool.
All right.